I was lucky that in 2019, my predecessor was really insistent that, as there was only two of us elected at the time, that there be continuity in understanding the public accounts. And I went to my first public accounts committee meeting in 2019. The kind of takeaways were that there was a lot of information to get through, and it was also like how to ask better questions, how to interact with the Auditor General, and then really understanding that there was a real value in actually asking those questions to the auditor at first. I've kind of taken the perspective of like there's no dumb question, especially when dealing with the auditor, because they really have that ability to support you in getting to the better questions. And then I also have come to understand that working collaboratively with your public accounts committee is actually quite beneficial for like the outcomes. And so it's been a number of years now. There's been some changes, but initially it was trying to figure out how to function within the kind of the set guidelines, but also how to make that work for Yukoners in our case. So it's really interesting in the Yukon context because the Public Accounts Committee actually was really not functional, and by not functional, they didn't hold meetings or hearings or anything for a large number of years. And when it started to get more, it started to actually start to roll in 2016, and by the time I joined in 2019, there was a real understanding that the best thing that we could do is, instead of asking wildly partisan questions, the decision was made internally that the committee people would bring in questions, but the committee by consensus would decide what questions would get asked. And really it was the real idea that no matter whose question it was going to be asked by, it might be asked by you, but the distinct possibility is it would be asked by another person. That doesn't limit our ability to have follow-up questions, but it really does gives us a core section of questions. And then the really other important thing that the committee decided to do is that we actually decided that we were going to submit the questions or send the questions ahead of time to the departments that we were actually calling in for the hearing. And the reason for that is it gave the departments the ability to actually come forward with answers, like the ability to know what we were going to ask about, kind of where our intentions were. And what we found is that it made the exchange a lot more productive. So instead of being told, we don't have an answer, we'll come back with it, what it really was the ability to have that conversation, and then it allowed us to ask follow-up questions that were relevant at the time. And so it may not be the practice of other public accounts committees across the country, but it's definitely one that I urge in for sure in the smaller jurisdictions, because what it has done is it has elevated our ability to have those conversations with the departments about the audits that we have had presented by the Auditor General. So one thing that we found, or I find really effective that we do is when the audits are initially presented, there's the in-camera briefing with the Auditor General, and that really gives a real opportunity to ask the honest questions, including if are there things that the auditor thinks that we should focus in on, are there things that they're less concerned about, so that kind of gives direction. The other part that I think is quite important is that we also, as committee members, we each go away and come back with our submitted questions. And it's interesting because you can see at that point in time, you can see a bit of the partisanship and you can see a bit of the direction, which as other people will say, can be a good or a bad thing. But I think the uniqueness of what we do is the fact that we decide on questions by consensus. So it really eliminates, ones that are incredibly supportive of governments and ones that are incredibly critical of government, and it kind of focuses more on the meat and potatoes of the issue. And then again, I think one thing that we do that is really important and has led to much better results is submitting our questions to the departments ahead of time. And that actually allows us to follow up. So if, for example, in a hearing we don't have enough time to get through, often in our case, mountains of questions, then the department then follows up with the written submissions. But also when we're following up, so at this point in time, it is practice of our committee to follow up on the recommendations. So 6 months later, 8 months later, whatever's an appropriate amount of time, we'll send a letter to ask about follow-up, where they are in those recommendations. And what we have seen here is that we've actually gone up to 2 years later to call the department back in for a follow-up on an audit and the initial presentation. So I think what we're really learning here is the importance of follow-up, but also the importance of trying to get actual answers during the public hearings as opposed to just wasting everybody's time. And I think that has been really effective for us.